Welcome back, my fellow duplicants, to Oxygen Not Included. Today we're talking a little bit about the Spaced Out DLC. Now, I have received a fair amount of questions about whether or not I'm going to start up a new game, or what might possibly be different from when I played the game, or starting just a few weeks ago, as compared to what it is now. And the first and foremost thing that I want to draw your attention to is the actual post down here. So there's future plans, and these have not really been implemented yet. There has been a fair amount of feedback as far as bugs, thoughts, all of this stuff has been very, very active. So some things have changed in the early to mid game. But as you can see from the actual patch notes themselves, the late game Planetoids and late game rocketry aren't part of the game as of yet. So keep that in mind. Now, while I know a couple of weeks in YouTube time feels like an eternity, it's really only been a little bit of time, so there's only been some tweaks to actually how the game works. However, with that said, there are changes to the environment that will have you making slightly different changes than when I played the game starting just a couple of weeks ago. So let's fire up a brand new map here in sandbox mode to take a look at what might have changed. Now, to make a lot of patch notes short, here's a couple of things that I've noticed and can remember right off the top of my head. Although I might miss quite a few of them, and this being early access might end up completely out of date the second I publish the video. But with that disclaimer out of the way, here's a few things that you might find if you start up the game this weekend that are different than when I played the game. Alright, so one of the biggest things that is different from when I was playing it to when you might be playing it now is the fact that there's going to be like a cool slush geyser or something like that. In my game, I have to kind of go and do a bunch of other steps to get the water, or I just add this into the game via debug tools. But the point is you should have a cool slush geyser or something like that available to you. There's possibly a couple of them. Another difference here is the plug slugs. In my game, they gave off a certain amount of power whether they were hungry or not. But that has since changed to the point where depending on how hungry they are, they'll give off a certain amount of power. So you can definitely get power from the plug slugs, but you do have to give up a little bit of ore in order to get that. So that's motivation to set up some more power systems as compared to just fully rely on the slugs. Look at them. Nom, 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 nom. Talking about critters, one of the other things we'll notice here is that there's going to be less wild grubs available. There's a lot of Sweetles, but you might have to go and actually find them, ranch them, and then convert them into bigger grubs. I think you can still find wild grubs if you go far enough. There's one. But as compared to my map, there was just grubs all over the place. So now there's quite a bit less of them. So you might have to make sure that your Sweetles are fed the right thing in order to get your wild grubs, or to get your tame grubs and ranch those things up to get your big efficiency boost in farming. One other change comes in the form of glass. In the previous setup here, this point of interest was surrounded by glass tiles. I was able to use that to my advantage to make up some solar panels. You can see that this has now been replaced by sandstone. And the actual window tiles, rather than being 400 kilograms, are now 25 kilograms. So still definitely useful. You can get some solar panels out of stuff like that. However, there's still a lot of reason to actually go and set up something like a glass forge, which you can honestly just do in the cold biome because there's a lot of cold areas in your starting biome here. Another change that will affect your kind of starting biome here is the change that they made to the oxygen masks. So in my playthrough, you saw me kind of mess around with this piece of equipment. So they've kind of reworked this oxygen mask system so that it takes a little bit less time in order to build up what you need in order to actually use it. So you saw me kind of use it and abandon it a little bit in my playthrough because it was just relatively slow. Well, it's a lot faster now. The difference here is just how much oxygen is inside of that mask. So you can see the oxygen tank down there is 20 kilograms as compared to a 70 when I was first playing with it. Moving on to the second Planetoid here. Probably the biggest change that I've noticed here is that they've included hatches over here. Kind of got to find them, but there's one. I believe those were not spawning in my game because the biomes were a little bit too small. They made that correction so that you can actually find those. Alright, moving on to the third Planetoid. The biggest change I've noticed here is that the volcanoes that were uncovered in my map are covered here so that they aren't constantly spewing out their contents. So that means all of the techniques that you've learned in the base game as far as how to tackle volcanoes can be employed here. As compared to trying to tame an active volcano, which gets quite interesting. But you can see right here, this thing is covered up to the point where it won't actually erupt. Another change I noticed down here in kind of the radioactive biome is that there's no longer yellow cake here. So I might have to just replace that with a different element, which I believe is either rust or possibly sulfur or something like that, just to kind of avoid causing problems in my game. But besides that, not a whole lot has changed down here. Maybe the carbon dioxide geysers are new. I haven't noticed those in my base. If we take a larger view at the star map here, what we can see is that I'm able to visit the first 3 planets. I believe the limit of our rocket doesn't really allow us to go and do a lot with any of these other planetoids. Although there are different environments there, a little bit more challenging. But until we actually get the rocket range to go there and work with them, there's nothing more I can do with them. So to kind of get back to the question of whether or not I'm going to start up a new map, well, it has a lot to do with the whole late game plans for this game. So when they go to implement this, if this facilitates starting up a new seed in order to get the stuff that I need spawned in the map in order to get to it and test it, then yes, I'll have to start up a brand new map. As it is currently, this game is still viable to test the rocketry system, which is kind of the mid-game thing that I'm on right now. Shipping things between there, seeing how that all works, exploring the automation, if there needs to be any tweaks and whatnot, so on and so forth. And based on your guys' comments, I think there's some ways to cheese the rockets, which we might have to explore. But the point is, how that affects my playthrough is, as I run out of things here to do, maybe in the next 100 cycles or so, then I'm going to transition more into the experimental stuff until new things are added to the game and then bounce them back and forth. But I'm just going to have to kind of play it by ear to see what happens. So with that in mind, what are some interesting experiment ideas? I think sour gas is definitely one of them. And if we can possibly do sour gas before we have that late game material, high temp stuff, that might be interesting. I know there's a fair amount of ideas I have revolving around rockets. Yes, they do put off a lot of heat. And there's many more elements that have been added to the game that we might be able to explore and possibly exploit for unlimited free energy. I'll let you think that stuff over, and for once, I'm gonna go get some sleep. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Stay awesome. Peace. Brothgar.